All right. All right, gentlemen, here we are doing our week of February the 18th lesson. This should be a study of heaven. We finished up our first semester, first half of all right, gentlemen, here we are. We're coming to you for our February the 18th, week of February 18th lessons. This is part one, where we're going to study heaven, and then part two, we'll look at hell. You should have taken the test for the first half of our material covered, and the midterm should be in the books. And we will try to have a meeting, live session next week, where we can discuss and talk about any questions that you have, and be able to do that. But right now, let's dig into our study. Turn to John chapter 14. John chapter 14, where we're going to be studying about heaven. So, what if you ask some kids, what is heaven like? What would some of the answers that you would get be? Well, you might hear that are gold streets on heaven, or people floating around on clouds. Kind of the images of people just playing harps, or us turning into angels, having wings and just kind of fluttering or flying around in heaven. For the golfer, it might be playing a beautiful course, more beautiful than Augusta National, where the Masters are held. For the fisherman, it might be catching the biggest fish you can catch. Some think of heaven as boring. It doesn't excite them much. Like it's a nice, clean place where you sing all the time, like an eternal church service, like a church service that just never ends. We have all these expectations of heaven. And that gets us to John chapter 14 in emphasis. And so you should have this sheet, What is Heaven Like? And we're going to look at what John 14 says about heaven. In this passage, Jesus is talking to his apostles before he is going to go to the cross. And he says in John 14, beginning in verse number 1, "Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. For in my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you that I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. And you know the way to where I'm going." Thomas said to him, "Lord, we do not know where you're going, and how can we know the way?" Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Notice a few important things about this passage. In verse 1, Jesus says, "Let not your hearts be troubled." This is a message of comfort. Heaven is about our comfort, and heaven should encourage us. It should motivate us. We should think regularly, daily, about the hope we have of heaven. This world has a lot of problems, and if it was not for our hope of heaven and for the promises we have of heaven, then we would struggle mightily with wondering about the future and about the problems of this world. Heaven should regulate our lives. I've said that if you delete heaven from our vocabulary, we are reduced to hopeless creatures that only focus on the here and now. In Colossians 1 through 5, Colossians 1, verses 4 through 5, faith and work come because of the hope laid up for us in heaven. So our faith and our work come in many ways as a response to the hope we have laid up for us in heaven. It's about our faith in God. Heaven is as real as our faith in God is real. Without faith, there is no heaven to you. And so we need to understand that heaven is a comfort. Jesus says, "Let not your hearts be troubled." He's talking to the apostles who were fearing his leaving, and we fear when our family members leave. We fear our own departure. He says, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. We need to take comfort in this message. It's about faith in God. Notice he says, believe in God. Heaven is about trusting that Father knows best. It's about trusting that God has prepared for us a place. And without faith, there is no heaven to you. And so without faith, this idea is very true. If we don't believe, then there is no heaven to us. And we are like the atheist. And so notice verse number 2. He says, believe in God, believe also in me. For in my Father's house, in God's dwelling place, is many rooms. Or is the idea there is it is abundance of space there. That we should not worry about running out of space in heaven, in God's house. Heaven is it's not about a mansion over the hilltop, as the song we sang, though that song is still a beautiful song. This is about the idea that in the Father's house, there is abundance of room. Each of us it's not about each of us getting a private estate. It's saying, don't worry. You will be able to enter the house of God. There's abundance room there. You get to go to God's house. You know, if you were able to be invited to the president's house or to some governor or dignitary, what an honor it would be. And you might receive an invitation that says, don't worry, there's plenty of room there. There's plenty of space for you there. So it is in this instruction by Jesus that he tells Christians, don't worry, there's plenty of room for you in your Father's house. Notice that it's about being at the Father's house. In my Father's house are many rooms. It is a prepared place for a prepared people. In verse 3 he says, I will come again. So he says, I've told you that I go to prepare a place for you. So we've emphasized in the last few lessons Jesus' emphasis upon us being prepared, upon us being ready. He says he's going to prepare a place for us. That's why heaven is a prepared place for a prepared people. Verse 3, he says, if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again. Another promise of his return. I will come again, will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. So he says, where I am, and the place where I am, is where you're going to be. Notice in verse 3 here that this is a key passage. It involves the promise of Christ's return. And notice the idea that he says he's going to take us with us. The comfort is he's taking us with us to be with him. He wants to give us comfort. He doesn't want our hearts to be troubled. Does he describe in this context the beauty and the details about what this heavenly place will look like? He doesn't, does he? He doesn't go into a lot of description. He doesn't tell us about streets of gold. He doesn't tell us about what Revelation 21 talks about, the huge walls of the city. He doesn't tell us about even the idea that there'll be no more pain, no more death, no more sorrow there. He tells us or points us to himself and to the Father. It's the Father's house. It's the Father's house. And then he points us to himself and the apostles to himself. They're worried about him departing, him leaving them. And so he tells them, I don't want you to be worried, because I'm going to come again. I'm going to take you to myself. And where I am, where my presence is, you will be with me also. You'll be in my presence. Notice, heaven, thus, is not about the what. W-H-A-T. Heaven is not about the what. That is, all the things we get to enjoy in heaven. But heaven is about the who. I have preached and taught this throughout. and it always seems to resonate with people. So many times people, and I think throughout different cultures, get focused on what is heaven like. And there's been books that have been best-selling books where they purport to tell about someone who had a vision, and they went to heaven, and then they reveal what they saw in heaven. And many of those books have been proven false. Later on, they'll retract the statements, or they'll say they made up the statements. But people eagerly consume this material. A lot of information about like after-death experiences, where the people tell about the vision of heaven they saw. And there's this hunger out there for what is the next world like? What is heaven like? And what we realize here in this passage is that Jesus isn't focused upon what heaven is like. It's not about the what. It is about the who. It's about who is there. You're in the Father's house. I will come again, receive you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. Heaven is about the who. Notice how in this text Jesus places emphasis on himself and them knowing him. Believe in God. Believe also in me. Verse 1, he emphasizes me. Verse 2, the Father's house. I go to prepare a place. Verse 3, I will come again. Where I am, you will be also. And then Thomas asked him the question in verse 5. Lord, we do not know where you're going. How can we know the way? How can we be with you if we don't know where you're going to be? Thomas is saying. If I don't know where you are, how can I go be with you? Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And so Jesus answers verse 5 by pointing once again to himself. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. And then verse 7 he says this, if you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on you do not know him, and from now you do know him and have seen him. Jesus is emphasizing the idea that you now know him, and thus you know me, so you know the Father, and this idea that you can have this personal relationship with me. Notice there's a part to God the Father that is admittedly somewhat tough for us to grasp. We haven't seen or touched him. He hasn't lived among us. Heaven is certainly tough. There's a hunger for knowing about it. Many of the traditional images about heaven, even the great ones and symbolic images of Revelation 21 and 22, are tough for us to grasp. They are things like streets of gold and huge gates of pearl, the tree of life, and a river flowing. Jesus doesn't go into any of those things. He doesn't try to explain it in human terms, but rather he points the disciples to his presence, to who he is. They will be with him. The fear is being away from Jesus. He comforts by saying, you will be with Jesus. This is the predominant answer of the New Testament regarding heaven. This is the predominant answer in the New Testament regarding heaven. It's not about the what, but it's about the who. Jesus is going to be there. Now, I've emphasized this in our other lesson on where are the dead, and the fact that the dead, we believe the Christian, when he dies, goes to be with the Lord. But that should be one of the main emphasis about heaven. In Philippians 1, 21 through 23, notice that we once again do not have a great description about heaven, but rather, Paul says, for to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. For if I am to live in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me. Yet which I shall choose, I cannot tell. For I am hard pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better. Paul is not saying my desire is to go and be in this most beautiful place. My desire is not to go to where it's like a beautiful mountain scene, or I'm living on the beach. You know, some people picture heaven as like they're resting on the beach. My desire is not to go and ride around on the clouds. My desire is not to live in this paradise place. What's Paul's desire? Paul's desire is to go and be with Jesus. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, the same idea is presented. Verse 1 and following talks about this earthly body, that we're going to be putting this earthly body off. And he says, for we groan, longing to put on our heavenly dwelling. That's verse 2. And then verse 5, he says, he who has prepared us for this very thing is God. So God is preparing us for this heavenly dwelling. Verse 6, for we are of good courage. We know that while we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. We realize that when we are in our body, we are absent from the Lord. So whether we are at home or away, we make it our aim to please Him. Paul says whether we're in the body or whether we're away from the body, we make it our aim to please Him. So there's a real sense that when we're in heaven, in this afterworld, our obligation and our desire is going to be and should be to please, to honor, to glorify Christ. You think about it, that's the scenes we see, like in Revelation 4 and 5, when the 24 elders sing glorious songs, and the whole entire earthly and world chorus and heavenly chorus joins in singing praises to the throne. Our duty now and our duty in the future will be to bring glory and honor to God. And so he says we make it our aim to please Him. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive what is due for what he has done in the body, whether good or evil. So verse 8, Paul emphasizes that his to be away from the body is to be at home with the Lord. What is to be at home? You know, we sometimes say home is where your heart is. Home is where your heart is. And for most of us, home is where our family is. I could take my family and I can move to another place, and if my family's there, it's going to be home. I have these four walls that we live in here, and we call this our home. But if we move to another place, that's going to be our home. Because where my family is, that's where my home is. And God, Jesus is saying, Paul is saying here, that if our heart is in heaven, if our heart is in Christ, then that's our home. And we're ready to be absent from the body. We're ready to put off this body so we can be at home with the Lord. This is why we've got to grow in our love of Jesus. That's why we've got to grow in our love of Jesus. In 1 John chapter 3, 1 through 3, the Bible says, see what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called children of God. And so we are. The reason why the world does not know us is that it did not know Him. The world did not know Him. Beloved, we are God's children now. And what will be has not yet appeared. But we know that when He appears, we shall be like Him, because we shall see Him as He is. Notice that we're not even promised or told about what all of our bodies are going to be like and what this next world is going to be like. But we are told that we're going to be like him. We're going to be like Jesus. We're going to be able to be with him and be like him. C.S. Lewis tells a story about a kid talking to his parents about love and marriage. And, his parents are expressing that their greatest joy and what it means to them is to have the love of their family and love of their spouse, and that deeper joy that you have as an adult of enjoying marriage and family unity and love. And that child doesn't get this. And the child said, what makes you the happiest? What makes you the happiest here? And for this child, he says, my greatest joy, what makes me the happiest is eating candy. He says, I love to eat candy. I'm just so happy when I eat candy. And he thinks, what possible thing could make me happier than eating candy? And they were trying to explain to him that, as a child, that's one thing, but as you get older, you're going to learn about things that are more valuable than candy. You're going to learn about love and intimacy and commitment and security, and how that gives you greater joy than candy. And I think that's the way it is often for us when it is with heaven. We will have a fuller and a complete, a deeper and more mature understanding one day. We are like children. We are like children. We get selfish and people get focused on what they're going to get out of heaven when they should, and we should be more mature and realize that it's really about the relationship. It's about love and intimacy and closeness. It's about gratefulness. It's about relationship. That's what theology primarily is. Theology is about relationship. It's about God's relationship with us. God moved, God acted to bring himself into a relationship with us by creating us, by reaching out to us despite our sins, despite us being an enemy of God, and God's great relationship that he has poured out and invited us to have, reconciled with him through his Son, Jesus Christ. And that relationship has begun while we're here on earth, but it will continue for all eternity. And so heaven is not about the what. Heaven is about the who. In the meantime, we focus on the who. We focus not on the what. Notice, even in Revelation, the passages that symbolically portray the story of the descriptions of heaven that are so often used. In Revelation 21, we see that really in heaven, the emphasis and the description John uses is really still about what God is like and who's there. Notice verses 3 through 5. Revelation 21, 3 through 5. I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people. Notice, God's going to dwell with us. We're going to be his people. God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more. For the former things have passed away. Notice, he's going to remove all these bad things, but the emphasis is on what? We're going to be with God. We're going to be in the presence of God. Look at verse 7. The one who conquers will have this heritage. What is the heritage that we have? We have the heritage that I will be his God, and he will be my people. So, we can be in the presence of God. And God can understand. We can have this intimate relationship with him. And he will recognize us in a complete, full fellowship as his people. Look at chapter 21, verse 22 and 23. And I saw no temple in the city, For its temple is the Lord God the Almighty and the Lamb. And the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it. For the glory of God gives its light, and its lamp is the Lamb. So notice that the idea here is, once again, that Jesus is saying that the city doesn't need a temple. Why? Because the God is in the midst. He's there. And the Lamb, Jesus, is in the midst. There is no need for an external light like we need sun and moon today to help light the world. Why? Because God gives it its light. And the lamp is the Lamb. The point being, once again, that we are not needing external things to provide for us because God is there. And then look at chapter 22, verses 3 through 5. No longer will there be anything accursed, but the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, and his servants will worship him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. And the night will be no more. They will need no light of lamp or sun, for the Lord God will be their light, and they will reign forever and ever. Notice how, once again, there's no longer going to be any accursed thing, but the throne of God and the Lamb will be in it. God's going to be there. God's going to keep out every wicked and evil thing. And what are we going to do? We're going to worship and honor and praise him. They will see his face. We're going to see the face of God. And God's going to have his name printed on our foreheads. That is the idea that we will belong to God. We'll be owned by God. We'll be a part of his family. There'll be no more darkness, no more night. Because God is going to be the light of this prepared place for a prepared people. So even in heaven, even in Revelation 21 and 22, which is often used to pick these symbolic descriptions and try to relate what heaven's going to be like, that's not the purpose of these passages. These passages are symbolically trying to portray so we can understand how great heaven is. But let's make sure we also understand that the emphasis is not about the what, but the who. It's about Jesus will be there, Father will be there, and we can be with him. Heaven is not solely about pleasure. Did you hear that? Heaven is not about pleasure, solely about pleasure. It will be pleasurable. It's not about an eternal beach scene or a golf course or endless days of rest on a hammock. Heaven is not about having everything you ever wanted. It's not about bigger barns and rich treasures, mansions over a hilltop, having everything your heart has ever desired. It's not where we take our physical world and we say, I want to have a beautiful house. I want to have all these things that we want on this earth, and say, one day I'll get them in heaven. That's not what heaven is. Heaven, hear me now, guys. Heaven is about God. Heaven is about God. If you don't want God or want him very near to you, we can hardly expect to be very interested or care anything about heaven. Heaven is not about the what, but it's about the who. Thus, it's about relationships. This includes relationships with all the righteous that have ever come, with departed loved ones, with friends and family, with saints from ages past. I believe there will be recognition in heaven, and that we can know one another in heaven. And we can discuss that at other times. But we see that evidenced in the Bible, as people who were beyond the grave recognized one another, like at the Mount of Transfiguration, where they recognized each other. Heaven, Revelation 14:13, will be a place of rest. It will be a place of work, Matthew 25:21 through 23. after the parable of the talents, enter into the joy of the Lord. And it speaks on that occasion of us being able to serve and work for the Lord. So heaven is a place where we'll be continuing to work for the Lord. That is, I want to read that 21 through 23. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over little. I will set you over much. We will have obligations and responsibilities in heaven. Heaven will be a place of beauty, as it is described in Revelation 21 and 22. God has aesthetic value in things. You look at how God created this world with all of its beauty. Look at how He created man and woman. Certainly we want to say women are more beautiful than men, but He created men even as handsome and having a level of beauty, and women, of course, with having beauty as one of their primary characteristics, in that they value beauty and they desire beauty. And we as humans desire beauty. Look at our artists that have come from us, creativity and our care. Everybody cares about looking at beautiful things. Looking at the mountains and the oceans, flowers and trees. We care about beauty. Heaven's going to be a wonderful and beautiful place. Heaven is about intimacy with God and about love and fellowship. It's a place with no more sin. A place where there'll be no more funeral homes or hospitals. A place where there will not be jealousy, strife, adultery, lies, hiding, and fears. Let me blow your mind on this one. A place where there'll be no money. Money here is a part of the necessary economic system, but money creates barriers between people. It creates strata or stereotypes with people and different divisions in people. Heaven will be a place where God will be all in all, and there'll be no levels of authority. What a wonderful thing to think about. God is going to have supreme authority, and all of us will have completed our task. We'll be serving God. We'll have some responsibility in glorifying God, but we will have given up authority to God. Even Christ will give up His authority, 1 Corinthians 15, as He presents the kingdom to God, and God can be all in all. So there will be unity in heaven around God. And so there'll be no more money with all the problems and divisions and worry and concerns. Heaven is going to be a wonderful place. There'll be no more social class systems, rich and poor. There'll be no more disabilities. We'll be able to be completely who we were intended to be in heaven. Heaven is not about the who, not about the what. It is about the who. Heaven is about the people, the person. It's about God. It's about relationships. This is about our love for God and Jesus. Sometimes a story goes about a sick man turned to his doctor as he was preparing to leave the examination room, and he was fearful about his coming, his impending death, and his worry about his health condition. And he said, "Doctor, I'm afraid to die." And he said, "Doc, can you tell me what's on the other side? Are you a religious man?" And very quietly the doctor said, "I don't know. I don't really know for sure." And the patient said, "Well, you don't know? I thought you were a man of faith. I thought that you had core convictions and you understood it and believed about heaven. And you're telling me you don't know?" And the doctor was holding the handle of the door, and on the other side came a sound of scratching and whining. And as he opened the door, the dog sprang into the room with his tail wagging in an eager show of gladness. Turning to the patient, the doctor said, "Did you notice my dog there? He's never been in this room before. He didn't know what was on the inside. He knew nothing except that his master was here. And when the door opened, he sprang in without fear. I know little of what's on the other side of death, But I do know one thing. I know my Master is there. And that is enough for me. Heaven's not about the what. It's about the who. We should take comfort in thinking about the who is there, not just about the what. And so I think if we live each day in a non-selfish way, not thinking about all of our attainments or this great paradise at the end of time, but we think about Jesus is there, then it calls us to a closer relationship with Him now and a desire to want to go be with Him in the future. I want to share a few other things with you from another lesson that I did on heaven one time. And in this lesson, I talked about the importance of hope and how hope is, quoting from Gabriel Marceau, is for the soul what breathing is for a living organism. Hope keeps us going. If we lose hope, we lose everything. I want to emphasize this idea that hope is so necessary. Let's see if I have this. I'll pull up a quote on hope for you in just a minute. And when I think about what heaven is like and as our true home, in this lesson I shared 3 main characteristics as I see it of heaven, and this may help you better understand what I'm trying to say about heaven and look at it a little from another perspective as well. The first thing that heaven is heaven involves intimacy. Intimacy. When you think about heaven, we struggle in this world for intimacy. We struggle in it with opening up our feelings, with feeling understood, with being left out. Not feeling a part of the group is a constant nagging feeling. We can people are seldom as close as they want to be in their relationships. Every family has a level of dysfunction and problems. And we hide ourselves. We hide and cover up. We live for years in marriages and in parent-child relationships, wanting more but not knowing often how to get them. We are designed for true intimacy and openness, but sin has marred our relationships. There's so much insecurity and bitterness, sins and anxiety. This all began in the garden in Genesis 2:15-25, right after they had sinned. In chapter 3, their intimacy of chapter 2 is gone. They had been naked and not ashamed, chapter 2:24-25, but now we see that they hide themselves. They had been walking with God in chapter 2, but now they're fleeing from God and hiding. Don't you love it when you're going somewhere and someone saves you a place? Someone saves you a seat there. You love it when you arrive and people get up and meet you and come outside to see you. In John 14, Jesus is telling us that He has prepared a place for us. And He's saving us a seat. He's saving us a place. Notice that in Matthew 22, the parable of the wedding feast involves the idea that God will have a place waiting for us. Heaven is described as a place of intimacy. It's a place of intimacy. In Revelation 21:3-4, we will be with God. We will be His people. And we will have that type of intimacy that only God knows. And then the imagery of Christ in the bridegroom as the bridegroom and in the church as His bride conveys this one of intimacy. We are living in the engagement period, if you will, now, that what the Bible calls the betrothal period. Like Joseph and Mary, they were betrothed. They were committed. They were in a relationship, but they were not yet fully able to enjoy all the blessings of marriage and be in that consummated union. So it is with the church and with Christ. We're in a marriage now. We're committed to one another, but we don't yet have the full intimacy and closeness that we will one day in heaven. Heaven is a place of intimacy, a place of closeness. We'll be free to be our true selves. We'll know others as their true selves. And what a wonderful thing it will be. Notice as well that heaven is a place of beauty. Place of beauty. When we love to look and see beautiful things. To see beautiful things. We travel on long trips to see beautiful sights. We spend thousands on a place with a view. We love to go to art galleries and golf courses and see beautiful buildings. And we like beautiful clothes. We like flowers. We care about beauty. In many ways, this world reminds us of a garden that starts out clean with no weeds. Then the plants begin to grow. They become healthy and strong and young and tender and beautiful. Then the plant gets too big. Weeds grow, plants put on their fruit and die. Some alive, some dead, intertwined, overgrown, and old. This is a good analogy for our world. There's a lot of beauty, but there's also a lot of ugliness, a lot of overgrowth, a lot of deadness in our world. Heaven will be a place of beauty, a place that will satisfy our longings for beauty, a place that will make us beautiful and content with who we are. The Bible writers try to describe heaven in the most beautiful of terms in Revelation 4, 3 through 4 and 6, in Revelation 21, 10 through 21. And then finally, heaven is a place of adventure, The fact that most Christians have a gut sense that earth is more exciting than heaven points to the deceptive power of the enemy in our own failure of imagination. We have a boring view of heaven in the general image and in the public. No wonder we think we have to get our happiness here, because heaven is going to be a kind of bland experience, we imagine. Christians often believe and give off the idea that heaven is going to be just this place of like an eternal church service. And that's sadly not exciting to many people. We think of heaven in these boring terms. But heaven is going to be exciting. It is. You look at the God of the Bible. He's exciting. He's adventurous. You look at what he does through the Old Testament. It's not boring. You look at what Jesus does when he is here. He wasn't boring. Great crowds came to him. He was exciting. And he was wondrous to be around. In Matthew 25, 21 through 23, men are given greater responsibility. We'll have work to do in heaven. They were given, Adam and Eve, a garden to tend before the fall came in Genesis 3. We will have jobs in heaven. In Revelation 3:12, him who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. We will be actively fulfilling our design. In Romans 8:21, we're given liberty as glorious children of God. We'll be able to have rest in heaven, Revelation 14:13. There's going to be an adventure and an excitement in heaven. Notice how the gospel writers speak of it with excitement and anticipation. 2 Peter 3:13, hastening and longing and anticipating the coming of the Lord. Hebrews 11:16 speaks of this heavenly country, this city that we're longing for. Paul was excited about it, Philippians 1:23. The intimacy and beauty will contribute to the adventure of heaven. We will be exploring and learning Christ, one another, ourselves. It's going to be a wondrous thing, without judgments, without all the entrapments, without all the ugliness of this world. This world is not as good as it gets. We do not have to place our hope and happiness in this world. We should place it in heaven. I had a story I wanted to read, an illustration that I am trying to find about hell and about hope that comes from that. and I am not seeing it. Let me check one other thing real quickly. It's about the loss of hope. Yeah, here it is. I don't know in the Philippines if y'all are familiar. Of course, you're familiar with our military history in World War II. But we, of course, fought a military conflict in Vietnam, close to you all, in the 60s. And a lot of ugly things went on there. And I was reading a book about a infantry that really got into a lot of problems because they were kind of abandoned by the higher-ups in the U.S. military and allowed to do some things they shouldn't have been allowed to do. And I want to read, it was called the Tiger Force. And this book tells the horrible tale of Vietnam Special Forces platoon that because of poor leadership, little supervision, and hatred committed numerous war crimes on innocent villagers. They did horrible acts like killing innocent civilians, murdering babies, and raping women. But there's a quote in this book that really stuck out. And this author writes this: after 8 years of research and the investigating officer who was studying this summarized why these things happen. And I want you to hear his answer. This is not from a preacher. This is from a military officer who dug into this. Here's what he said. He said, this was part of a deeper and larger struggle between good and evil. It wasn't so much a fight for power as a battle over whether platoon soldiers and commanders would succumb to their own dark instincts. What they never confessed was that somewhere between their ambushes, booby traps, and humping in the glaring sun, they lost hope. They lost hope. Somewhere in the blackness of the night, they lost faith. And in the end, there was nothing to separate them from the devil. That is a powerful quote. How true this statement is for all humans. Without hope and without faith, we lose our goodness and our desire for righteousness. Humans turn into selfish, hateful, jealous, vengeful, bloodthirsty, despicable people who do not believe, who do unbelievable horrors. Faith and hope make the difference. Without them, we turn our lives over to sin and we become a tool of Satan. Faith and hope make the difference. We cannot lose hope. Heaven is about us maintaining hope and faith that we will be with God. That what we see here on earth is not the true reality. That there is a spiritual reality which supersedes this physical reality which says focus on all the greed and all the substance of this life. But heaven says, live for Jesus. Love Jesus. Glorify Him now and long to go be with Him. That's what matters. Heaven is not about the what. It's not just about some pleasurable paradise experience. Heaven is about Jesus, the Spirit, and God. We love them now, and we want to be with them for eternity. This is why people that don't love God, don't care about God, are going to miss out on heaven. That will lead us to the second hour when we're going to talk about hell. So we'll take a little break. In the second hour, we'll discuss hell in part 2.